Hey, runners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, sport dietitian, certified running coach, and personal trainer. We are currently wrapped up on season 3 of the show. Thank you so much for another wonderful season. And not to worry, we will be back for season 4 in early 2026. Until then, I'm so excited to share these re-releases of the top 10 episodes from this past season. So each week we'll be dropping a new re-release from season 3 that hopefully you can catch or give another listen to. If you already heard it once, maybe you'll pick up some new gems this time around. Some of these re-release episodes are fan favorites. So these are the episodes that had the most listens and downloads from you guys, my lovely listeners and subscribers. But some of them are also my personal favorites that I just wanted to reshare. Some of the ones that if you missed the first time around, I really hope you'll tune in and give them a listen this time. I hope in these episodes you're going to find some new gems, maybe some new aha moments when it comes to your nutrition, your training, your recovery, your relationship with food and exercise, or maybe just a little bit of extra motivation to keep you running strong until we're back in 2026. And of course, if you haven't downloaded my new free resource, which is my free fueling audit for runners, definitely head over to the link in the show notes and be sure to get your copy ASAP. This is just a quick checklist that will walk you through the most common signs and symptoms of underfueling in runners and help you identify where the gaps are with your eating habits and where poor nutrition might be holding you back from reaching your full health and performance potential. So once again, head over to the link in the show notes, definitely grab your free fueling audit, and of course, let me know your score once you're done. All right, let's dive into this week's replay. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast, where today we are talking about 3 pieces of bad running advice that you might have thought was good advice, but I want to just come in here today and I want to talk about how some of these things that have been sort of, floating around the internet for a really, really long time, and you still hear them today. I even see some like really high profile coaches, sharing a lot of this stuff and promoting some of these messages. And I want to talk today about how a lot of this advice is just outdated, kind of based on flawed ways of thinking about running and thinking about performance, and how maybe like in theory, some of these might sound pretty good on paper, but like, does that translate to real world benefits for the runners actually trying to follow this advice? So we are going to, cover a couple of different angles here today. And I hope that you find it helpful just to, maybe undo some learning and kind of shift your mindset a little bit about how you think about some of these aspects of training. So first up, our first big one is that you should run fasted to burn more fat. And so this is the first piece of what I consider to be really bad advice. Again, just kind of outdated, based on some science that was done, a couple decades ago that ultimately did not pan out in terms of translating to performance benefits. But as research evolves and as these things happen, people kind of grasp onto one part of maybe, some initial benefit or some initial positives that came out of a couple of studies and sort of just, run with things and keep sort of perpetuating these things, even though further research of that area has actually changed what we understand or kind of changed the way that we look at the outcomes associated with this research. And the idea or the concept of running fasted to burn more fat comes from 2 different places, right? There's 2 different angles that we look at this at. The first one is that if I run fasted, therefore I am burning more fat during my runs. I am burning more body fat. Therefore, it will be easier for me to lose weight when I run. And this is a weight loss strategy that I'm incorporating in order to see changes in that area. The other angle of it might not be from a weight loss perspective necessarily, but if I run fasted, I am now training my body to burn more fat. Therefore, I don't need as much supplemental carbohydrate during my run. and I am going to be able to perform better with taking in less fuel, and therefore I am more efficient and don't need to like bring as many gels with me, etc. So there's two different ways that we can kind of look at this, and it might be the same runner seeing the potential benefit or kind of seeing the theoretical benefit from both of these angles. Like, yes, I want to not need as many gels during a run, but like also I would like to lose some weight. So like fasted running just sounds like sort of a, you know, a perfect solution for all of these things that I'm trying to change. Or it might be kind of one or the other. Now, in my practice with the types of runners that I work with, and of course, the types of runners that I see in a lot of like the Facebook groups that I'm in and posting questions on social media, stuff like that, it typically is coming from a weight loss perspective or a weight loss mindset. Someone wanting to drop a few pounds for, as they're going through marathon training, or maybe they've been gaining weight throughout a marathon training cycle and they want to see if they can shift that. It might be the belief that lighter is faster, which is one of the other bad pieces of advice that we're going to talk about today. So I kind of want to focus on that angle, because when it comes to running fasted to burn more fat and increase our reliance on fat as a fuel source, it's not really a matter of the pre-workout meal that we've consumed that is going to directly translate to what we burn as a fuel source during that workout, right? Why we burn more fat during certain workouts versus others actually has way more to do with the intensity of that workout and like the total duration, because we're never just burning fat or carbs and it's like this switch that flips between the two, like it's one or the other, right? There's always a combination of fat and carbs being burned at any given time, whether we're at rest or otherwise. And so if we're talking about a long, slow, easy type of run, there is still a contribution of carbohydrates there, even though, yes, the majority of the calories that we're burning is coming from fat. But that has nothing to do with whether or not we consumed carbohydrates before we are doing that workout. It has everything to do with how intense that workout is. So even those slow, easy runs, if we are not fueling with some carbohydrate, we can still run out of muscle glycogen. We can still hit the wall, even if it's not an intense, fast workout or run. So, from the angle of looking at this from a weight loss perspective, right, it seems to make sense, right? If we skip out on those pre-workout calories, we don't take in any calories before a workout, then we are going to force our body to use our own body fat stores in order to fuel that workout. And like, yeah, fair enough, right? Especially for those slow, easy runs. But we are burning more fat as a fuel source during those slow, easy runs, regardless of whether or not we ate, or regardless of what we ate before that workout. And that's the important point to kind of remember, right? The intensity of the workout, the demands of that training session are the biggest factor in determining one or the other. What's really interesting is that the adaptation of burning more fat as a fuel source happens with more aerobic base building. So this happens with training, right? Doing more volume, being more consistent with your running week after week, month after month, year after year. It is not a matter of just cut out those pre-workout calories, cut out that pre-run snack, and you're going to accelerate that ability or accelerate those results, right? This happens with training either way. So fueling up before you run, even if you are trying to lose body fat as a runner, means that you are going to have better endurance. You are going to be able to run at faster paces, right? Get into those higher intensity zones for longer, which ultimately is going to benefit you because it means that you're going to be able to sustain harder efforts. You're going to become more fit, therefore be able to handle a higher volume, higher intensity of training, which is what is going to make you become a better runner. So there's lots of reasons to fuel before you do even your shorter workouts and your shorter runs. Yes, if we're talking about going out for like a 30 or 40-minute easy, slow run kind of thing, like, yeah, okay, like I still think you should fuel up before you do all of your workouts just for the habit of it and the gut training and everything. But, technically you'll survive if you don't. But it's those longer runs, right? It's the runs that are going to take you more than an hour. It's any runs where you're going to have faster efforts, faster paces, harder efforts kind of built in there. Things like that really, are going to make or break your progress in this sport and make or break your ability to really step up to those challenging workouts and complete them in a way that feels very capacity building and very empowering. If you're just scraping by, you're just scraping the bottom of the barrel just to like complete some of these runs. If you just feel like, your pace is always slowing down, you're really trying to pick it up for those harder intensity sessions, but you have a really hard time getting to that next level of speed, proper fueling can do an incredible amount for your performance, and then translate that to better race times and translate that to better results. So it really has far more to do with the exercise intensity and we want you to do a lot of those slower, easy miles anyway. So you're going to get the benefit of, what we'll call quote unquote fat adaptation in that sense of burning a greater proportion of fat as a fuel source and giving yourself, a long time, right? Like months, years of training to become more efficient. This is not the kind of thing that just happens overnight. It's not the kind of thing that we just do in one race cycle, but thinking really long term and big picture with this stuff. Because the reality is, we're doing our slow, easy run, right? Or we're in our warm up phase of a workout. Or if you're just sitting here at rest, right? Even just sitting here, me talking to you, maybe you're driving as you're listening to this podcast episode, or maybe you're on a walk or an easy run or cooking or cleaning or something like that as you're listening today. At rest, we are primarily using fat for fuel. But again, primarily, not exclusively. This is not a all or nothing switch that flips back and forth. Now we start to run and we start to run faster. And as we start to run faster, as that intensity rises, our demand for a quicker energy source also increases. The thing about fat is that fat gives us a lot of energy. So breaking down a molecule of fat gives us a huge amount of energy that our body can use compared to that same molecule of carbohydrates. So whenever we can, we are going to use fat as fuel because it just gives us more bang for our buck compared to carbohydrates. However, carbohydrates are a faster source of energy. So we can break it down and we can get the energy out of it more rapidly with fewer steps in that metabolic process. And so as we need more quicker energy to be delivered to our working muscles as we're running faster, right? Those muscles are firing more rapidly. We have more muscle activated. We need more calories being sent there. We need more energy more quickly. And so this is why we are shifting gears towards an increased reliance on carbohydrates. We also do not necessarily need oxygen available in order to break down carbohydrates. So we can break down carbohydrates more rapidly. And as we increase our demand for oxygen, we are breathing deeper. We are breathing more frequently when we're running faster. It gets more difficult for us to have enough oxygen available to completely break down a molecule of fat or a molecule of carbohydrate. So we can partially break down carbohydrates and we then get lactate or lactic acid, as you sometimes hear it called. And this is a whole other kind of topic, whole other area, but it's something that is really important to understand, because when you understand what is happening in the body in terms of how we're using fuel for energy and what is fueling those workouts and our ability to sustain those harder efforts, I think it helps to translate food into something more than just something that makes us gain weight. And this is what's so hard for a lot of people, is that the diet culture that we live in basically teaches us from a very young age that food is the enemy. Food is something that we have to battle. And food is something that we are always going to have to have our guard up and use all this willpower and strength, and that we're just sort of helpless around food, and we're weak because we like to eat, and it's a bad thing to like to eat carbs. Like, I can't tell you how many clients I'll work with that sort of sheepishly admit to me that they like pasta. Like, it's this sense of deep guilt and shame to enjoy food and to like to eat food. And especially if you live in a larger body, then it's something that is really seen as such a negative, or such a character flaw in our society. And this is not conducive to, fueling yourself properly as a runner so that you can have better performance. And this is true at any and all body sizes. We still need to fuel ourselves, even if we do have, and even the leanest runners, right? This is not about, a specific body fat percentage. Like, we all have thousands and thousands and thousands of calories of body fat available. Like, even people who are very lean and have a lower body fat percentage still have thousands of calories stored in their body fat. So this is not a matter of like, oh, you have enough energy available to fuel these workouts, so you just need to not eat, and then you will force yourself to use your body fat for these workouts. Like, that's just not how this works at all. Instead, when we understand what is going on in our bodies and how we can fuel properly for the different efforts and for the different workouts that we're doing, I think it really helps us to understand that, like, food is not the enemy. Food is not something that we should feel any amount of guilt or shame for eating or enjoying or admitting that we need. We've had so many different diets over the years that have come and gone out of popularity, and I can't even begin to list them all by name. But now, with fasting being kind of, a trend that got very popular a couple of years ago, I think is still hanging on in a lot of circles of, okay, so we don't like low fat, we don't like low carb, we don't like this, that, or the other thing. Every diet, every food has been villainized at some point in time here. It gets to the point where people are like, well, I don't know what to eat, so I'm just going to not eat, period. And this is my new sort of badge of honor, or this is the thing that is going to finally get me where I want to be with my weight, is I'm just going to not eat anything. And I'm going to force myself to start burning all this extra body fat. And I'm going to, force myself to dig into these fuel stores that I already have. And what we see is that this just backfires. Maybe at first somebody will lose a little bit of weight, like, that's fair. But we have metabolic adaptations that occur. We see a sort of a trigger of overeating at other times of day, right? We are under fueling earlier in the day. We're doing a lot of fasted training. And then we just get so hungry by like mid-afternoon into the evening that we're just eating very large amounts of calories after the fact. So there's this huge disconnect between when we need the energy and when we're eating it, which isn't great for performance or body composition. As well as, again, this broken relationship with food and exercise, where the exercise feels way harder than it needs to. We are struggling with even, some pretty, I'll say, easy workouts, right? We're struggling through workouts that shouldn't be such a struggle. We're having a very hard time hitting the intensity, the paces, the volume that we need in order to actually improve. And we're just stuck because we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to just fuel our bodies properly and really make peace with the fact that, yes, we need energy to train. We need fuel to train. It is okay to like and eat food. So there is my soapbox. Thank you for listening. If you're still with me after all of that, the biggest problem that I see is that we're talking about, that reliance on carbohydrates and needing to burn more carbohydrates at those higher intensities of training. And again, this is not to say, okay, I ate carbs, therefore I'm going to burn carbs during this workout versus burning fat. It's that I'm running faster. I have a higher demand for that quick energy. And so it's a good thing that I had this pre-workout meal, because now I have that energy available. Because what happens if we don't have enough muscle glycogen stored, right? What happens if we're trying to run at a certain pace that fuel is not there, we do not have enough to sustain that workout, this is where we bonk, right? This is the bonk. And we can create glucose out of proteins in the liver. So the liver is a very, very cool organ. I think it's the coolest organ in the body. It's not the prettiest organ, but it's the coolest. The liver is able to actually create glucose molecules out of protein. The thing is, we didn't eat protein before that workout either, right? So where's that protein coming from? Well, that protein is coming from muscle tissue. And so this is like the worst case scenario for a lot of runners, where we are doing high intensity workouts. We're not fueling enough before. And now we're actually digging into our muscle mass in order to support the demands of those training sessions. So the training does not feel good, right? We are struggling through workouts that we probably shouldn't be struggling through, right? All things considered. And over time, we're actually seeing a reduction in our muscle tissue, right? So when it comes to weight loss, yes, maybe the scale will go down, right? Like obviously, if we're in a calorie deficit and we're maintaining that calorie deficit, the scale might drop, but we might be losing the wrong kind of weight. We might be losing muscle mass. And this is the last thing that we want, because what that means in terms of translating to performance is that we're going to struggle even more with strength, with speed, and with endurance. So we can actually have a worsening of body composition over time. And so when we, and this isn't just like anecdotal, this isn't just like me with what I see out there and with what my clients experience. When we look at the research done on this type of fasted training or like low carbohydrate eating as a runner, and just like not fueling the way that we would suggest or recommend, we don't see an improvement in performance. And many of these studies also note that athletes' overall abilities to train at higher intensities are negatively impacted, and that a lot of these athletes also have to reduce their overall training volume. So they cannot train as hard or as much as they otherwise would have been. And so therefore performance is not improved. Even if, yes, we do see an adaptation towards burning more fat for fuel and see some of these things happen, it does not translate to better performance overall. So I would be very, very cautious about continuing to follow this piece of advice, because, both from a practical perspective of like what happens in the real world to people who are doing this, but also when we look at the research done in these areas, we just don't see it pan out. And what I want to really offer up here is instead thinking about fueling properly for the demands of our workouts. So this does not mean that like we're eating a big like buffet breakfast of, like 3 bagels and 2 glasses of orange juice and cereal. Like we're not carb loading before a 30-minute easy run, right? We're just simply fueling properly for the demands of our training. So that means eating a pre-workout meal that is adapted to the specific workout we have planned, right? And adjusting what we're eating for what we're going to be doing. Ensuring that we have adequate muscle glycogen available to really be able to give it our all for those tough sessions, right? So that you can finish that and be like, wow, I did that. I can't believe that I was able to hit those paces, sustain that effort, like finishing those workouts and just feel like an absolute rock star that you were able to do that because you fueled properly. And so then if we're able to actually get stronger, get faster, build more endurance, build more fitness, build more strength, we're not consistently bonking on all of these workouts or walking for the last few miles of all of our long runs. We are then going to see that translate to better performance and, yes, even better body composition, right? We're matching up our fueling strategy for the demands of our training. And then we're able to train at our fullest potential or our fullest capacity, which is going to do wonderful, wonderful things for the results that we're going to see from the work that we're doing. So fasted running, in theory, on paper, I understand where this came from. I understand why it seems like it would be good advice, but in reality, we do not see a translation to the supposed or purported benefits. And I really think that, if you do want to be mindful of your carbohydrate intake or your calorie intake for any reason, if it is a weight kind of focus or anything like that, then those calories should be reduced from other times of day. So not right around when you're training, right? We want to support good quality training. We want to support good results in recovery from our training. And those extra calories, if we do need to reduce calories at all, is going to come from other meals at other times of day. We want to have a very kind of tight relationship between when we're most active and when we're getting in that fuel. That is the fast track to the best possible results. All right, so number 2, we have train low, race high. Now, this is another one that, you might have seen tossed around in some circles, Facebook groups, again, maybe suggested or recommended by some coaches in the running space or the endurance sports space. And this advice is kind of similar to the previous point with that second angle that we talked about of looking at pro fat adaptation, like the mindset or the thought that we really want to do everything we can to emphasize and promote fat adaptation. Because there's a lot of people who will agree and obviously see we have tons and tons and decades of research to show that carbohydrates improve performance. But for some people, still kind of, promoting the idea that fasted training is going to provide some benefit, right? Whether that's a performance benefit of the fat adaptation, or maybe it's that we want to see some weight loss heading into a race, whatever it might be. We recognize that for racing specifically, there's this benefit to consuming carbohydrate for that race setting. But outside of that race setting, we want to be training with these depleted glycogen stores more often. Now, there is going to be a time and a place in our training where we are going to run low on muscle glycogen, which is going to promote specific adaptations in the body. But this is something that happens during our long runs and our long workouts. And we're not carb loading each and every week going into our long runs. We know that it takes several days of carb loading to maximize these muscle glycogen stores. So the idea that the average runner who's, running 30, 40, 50 miles a week in training for a race is going to be walking around with full muscle glycogen stores all the time, that's just not true, right? That's just not the case. So we are going to be depleting our muscle glycogen stores, or at least getting them close to depleted, at least some of the time, especially during our long runs, right? Those runs that are taking longer than 90 minutes. We are going to have some intra-run fuel and that pre-workout meal, but those calories are nowhere near the calories that we're burning from that workout. And so we're, again, getting those adaptations from doing the work. We don't have to do anything crazy or extra difficult or complicated with our nutrition. Just from doing the work and fueling properly and putting the time into our training, we get the benefit. So with this idea that we train low and race high, we are, actively trying to train in this glycogen depleted state. But then for race day, we are then including pre-intra-workout fuel, maybe even some carb loading to maximize glycogen and carbohydrates on board for those race level efforts, right? And again, it makes sense in theory, right? The idea is to train your body to work on this low carbohydrate availability. It adapts, becomes more efficient. And then on race day, you're loading up on those carbs and you're superhuman, right? You're filling yourself up with jet fuel and you're going to have just an amazing performance as a result. So we have already discussed, of course, earlier in this episode, the issues with doing really large volumes of fasted training, especially those harder sessions and long runs. But what if you did that and then you were just kind of fueling up for race day? Honestly, we've talked about all the issues with fasted training as a whole and how that isn't something that I would suggest that you do on an ongoing basis. Again, short, easy run here and there without fuel beforehand, not the end of the world, right? You do likely have enough muscle glycogen on board to get you through some of those shorter, easier efforts. So you do not have to fuel up before every single run, no matter what. But I still think it's a good idea to fuel up before every run, because why not, right? However, if you just are fueling up for race day and only race day, especially as someone who's fairly new to running and fairly new to racing and fairly new to using some of these intra-run products, my number one issue is the chances of you winding up with GI issues, right? Golden rule of running is nothing new on race day, right? How many times have you heard nothing new on race day? So this is a perfect example of what not to do, right? You're going to train without any intra-run fuel for months. You're going to not have gels or anything like that. And then suddenly on race day, you're going to like try them for the first time, potentially. The problem with this is that your digestive system has not been trained to be taking in any amount of carbohydrate, never mind the 60 plus grams of carbohydrates per hour that we would recommend for like marathon running. So you're going to go from no gels during training to now having to take in like 3 gels an hour. There are very, very high chances that you're going to have some GI distress on that run, and it's going to seriously derail your performance. Or the other hand, you're going to maybe take like 1 or 2 gels over the course of that entire marathon. You're trying to race at a pace that, maybe you have no business trying for without having trained with this fuel. And again, the chances that you are going to have GI issues is so, so, so much higher than if you had just simply done the gut training and used these fuel sources during your training runs. And so, again, in theory, this might be a good idea, but in practice, you might wind up finding that you're spending way more time in the bathroom on the day of that race, or you can't run as fast because as soon as you try to get going again, oh, there goes your stomach. I mean, you might be throwing up on the side of the road while you're running, or, waiting in line at the porta potties for a lot longer than you want to. So it can just really, really make or break your race day to do something like that. So nothing new on race day is good advice for everything, including your intra-run fueling and hydration strategy. The other thing too is that like logistically, if you haven't been training and using these products in training, you also probably have not trained to like take a gel while running, right? Like you've got your pacing plan created, you've got, what you're going to be doing and what paces you want to be hitting and all your splits and everything planned. But now we're tacking on the extra, like, okay, now I got to like reach into my pocket, maybe undo a zipper, pull out a gel, get it open. I got to like, take it. Maybe I can do it with one hand. Maybe I can't. Like, I haven't practiced this before, right? This is definitely going to slow you down if it's something that you have not practiced with and trained with during your entire block. And I see this all the time where, some people even like to walk to take their fuel and actually slow down to walking to take their fuel, maybe as they're going through an aid station or what have you, because it is like, it can be tough and you really have to practice doing those things, especially as you're running maybe at marathon pace, right? If you are really putting in an all out effort for that race, then you want to make sure that you've had at least a few training runs where you're doing everything the way you're going to do it on race day. And that includes taking in your fuel and hydration. So just like fasted training in general, not a great piece of advice. Training low, racing high, do not recommend that either, especially if you do not have a tremendous amount of experience with racing and doing these things. Now, if you're someone with lots and lots and lots of experience, and this is a specific strategy that you're implementing, but like your gut is trained, you've taken gels a million times before during races, at marathon effort, whatever it might be, then like, yeah, like maybe there is a strategy here and maybe this is something that you can incorporate. But even still, of course, we do know that there are a tremendous amount of benefits to fueling properly for your runs and for your workouts. And so it would have to be a pretty specific scenario where I would say, okay, yeah, let's do a lot of training low to race high, considering, like I said, you are getting that benefit of glycogen depletion and the adaptations that take place after that, just simply from doing the work and doing those long runs. So the last one that I want to talk about today is the fact that lighter is faster. And this is one that like it feels very obvious to me that this is not as simple as what is kind of put out there, but I'm surprised at how often I still see people like sort of perpetuating this very kind of simplistic idea that if I just lose XYZ pounds, I will automatically be XYZ faster. Like you even see online calculators that will say like, oh, this individual at this weight, like if you reduce your weight by this much, you will be this much faster, like per mile or that kind of thing. Like you see some things like that, these sort of calculations and estimates. And what we are completely missing the mark on here is body composition, right? Fueling, and of course, power to weight ratio, which essentially is going to come from like muscle mass to weight ratio and this conversation around body composition. And, this would be fair, like this sort of assessment of like, okay, lighter is faster in the sense that like moving a heavier object requires more energy than moving a lighter object. So if we were talking about something, sort of simplistic and external, like pushing an object while we run, like say stroller running, right? You're running, you're pushing a stroller. When you have a, newborn baby or, 6-month-old baby is the recommendation when you start running with a baby. So you've got your 6-month-old in that stroller, right? And that 6-month-old, I don't know, I don't remember how much my kids weighed at 6 months. Let's say your 6-month-old is 12 pounds. I have no idea. Maybe your 6-month-old is 12 pounds. Maybe mine was. I don't know. So you've got a 12-pound baby in this stroller and you're pushing it. When that kid is 3 years old and maybe weighs 40 pounds, right? Yes, it is going to take a considerably greater amount of effort to be pushing that stroller with the 30 or 40 pound baby versus the 12-pound baby, right? Like that is fair. I mean, this is like physics. This is very easily like mathematically kind of equated. This is open and shut, right? However, if we're talking about you being you are the thing that is moving the energy and moving the mass, we need to be also looking at things like training, fitness, body composition, fueling, and hydration, right? It's so much more than just the body weight we're moving. Because if you are doing, say, a research study, for example, and you have the same person, you as an individual, and you're pushing the lighter thing and pushing the harder thing. Well, yeah, of course, right? You are the same person. The only variable here is the lighter or the heavier object. Really, really kind of cut and dry, really, really sort of simple. But if we are changing our body weight, what kind of body weight are we changing? And what is that coming at a cost to with our fitness, with our fueling, and with our strength? So think back to that first conversation that we had here today about doing a lot of fasted training, right? So imagine the runner who takes the advice of they should be doing all their training fasted. And while they're doing all that fasted training, they do in fact lose, I don't know, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever. They lose some weight. Cool. But a big proportion of that weight that they lost was in fact muscle mass. So now they have a worse power to weight ratio than they did before. So they might be a few pounds lighter or maybe quite a few pounds lighter, right? But if they have a corresponding loss of strength and maybe a corresponding loss of fitness because they weren't able to do the workouts, the volume, the intensity that was necessary in order to improve their strength and improve their fitness, they could be slower than the person who maybe fuels properly, does not lose any weight, but gains fitness at that exact same body weight. So body composition can affect performance in the sense that like if we do see a reduction in body fat, which is, essentially like muscle is what's pushing us along, right? Our muscle is doing the work while we're running and body fat is along for the ride. That yes, if we do see a reduction in body fat percentage with a maintenance of muscle mass and muscle strength, then we might have an easier time running at faster paces. And that's a way that we can build speed and run faster. But we have to toe this line very carefully, right? Like this is not just reduce weight at all costs with fad diets, with extreme restriction, with doing a lot of fasted training, like with doing things that are ultimately going to negatively impact our ability to continue to train and our ability to continue to build and maintain muscle mass along the way. So be very, very cautious about the assumption that just getting our weight down automatically translates to better performance and faster speeds, because it is not that simple, right? This is a very simplistic way of kind of looking at it. And if we're too focused just on the number on the scale and thinking that getting the number on the scale down to a certain point is going to automatically translate to a PR, that's just not the case, right? I would really encourage you here if you're kind of thinking that, and I've seen people even do it with like BQ times, like to say, oh yeah, my current marathon PR is XYZ time. Man, if I just lost 20 pounds, I'd be guaranteed a BQ. And I mean, that may happen, right? If a person does the training properly and they have a very specific training plan that gets them to that goal, if they're fueling properly and they are seeing improvements in body composition that are in alignment with getting them closer to that goal, yeah, you can work towards getting that PR. It's never a guarantee, right? Like you're never going to be guaranteed a PR, even if mathematically you see an online calculator that suggests otherwise. It's never going to be a guarantee. But yes, that will set you up for much better chances of success. But if you see that and you do all kinds of really, restrictive, extreme, unhealthy things just to get that number down, you may wind up slower, not faster in the long run. And so what I really would love for you to do is I would just love to encourage you to shift your goals towards thinking about fueling adequately for the demands of your training. Regardless of the number on the scale, train for the specific race goals that you have. And then we tailor your nutrition strategy for the right body composition for you. Now, that may not be the lightest weight possible, right? We're looking at that balance of strength, power, endurance, having enough glycogen on board to be able to do the things that we're trying to do with your training so that we can get you the results that you need or that you want, right? This isn't about just cut calories as much as possible, do as much fasted training as you can, like it's about working smarter and really having a strategy that is specific for what you're trying to achieve and taking weight kind of out of the equation, making it second to the rest of the equation. But if we are looking at the approach of being just smart and personalized with what we're trying to achieve, it's amazing what we can do and where we can get to, perhaps without the scale really moving at all. I've had clients do unbelievably impressive things with their PRs and with their race times. And, we can maybe think that the body composition has improved, their body composition has improved, but we're not necessarily looking at that as a main factor, right? We're putting the effort into the training and letting the rest speak for itself and fall into place. So that's what I work on with my clients. That's what I would really, really love for you. If you need help in this area, like if these things that we've talked about today are things that you've heard, if you're struggling with them, if you're thinking like, okay, Steph, like this all sounds well and good and whatever, but like, where do I start? How do I, get that personalized approach? How do I get that plan? How do I understand how to tailor my nutrition strategy for better body composition and better training results? Then this is where I have tons of really, really good resources to help you. So I have a free fueling and strength training guide for runners, which you can download at the link in my show notes. I also have an online program specifically for runners. It's called the Fuel Train Recover Club. And this is a one-stop shop for runners who really want to understand this next level of fueling for performance and training in a way that helps you reach your goals without just like killing yourself over it and without just, doing way too many hard miles, without injury, without burnout, just finding that balance to really, really get that joy back in running and really enjoy the process of training, enjoy your food, not feel guilty about everything you put in your mouth anymore, understanding how nutrition requirements change depending on the season of training that you're in, and how to really make that come together in a way that feels easy and doable without following really complicated diet plans, doing a ton of food tracking and stuff like that. So all of this is here for you inside the Fuel Train Recover Club. And I would love for you to join me this season as you're getting ready for your next race. You can get all the details about that as well at the link in the show notes. And then, of course, I do offer one-on-one coaching, both nutrition and run coaching. And you can get all of the details about that by visiting my website as well. That's www.stephanienatchuk.com. So if any of these myths have been in your head, then don't worry, you're not alone, right? The key is just learning what actually works for your body, making choices that support your long-term performance, not just these sort of short-term hacks and just kind of like short-term, essentially quick weight loss schemes that we keep seeing out here. So that's it for this week's episode. I really hope that you found it helpful. I would love to hear what you think of this episode. You can find me over on Instagram at Steph the Runner's Dietitian. Let me know what you think of this episode. Leave your comments here on Spotify. And of course, if you enjoyed it, you want to share this with some of your running friends, I would love if you helped spread the word about this podcast and shared it with the runners in your life. That's it for this week. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you right back here next week. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.